2025 was a big year for the Supreme Court as it repeatedly handed win after win to the Trump administration. Emergency orders, also known as the shadow docket, let President Donald Trump keep his tariffs in place, withhold foreign aid, and conduct immigration raids largely based on racial profiling. But lawsuits filed by complainants mean that many of these cases will be ultimately decided in the new year. Hot button issues such as transgender athletes in sports, whether birthright citizenship is a constitutional right, and if redistricting efforts in Louisiana have effectively disenfranchised voters are among many impactful decisions we expect to hear in 2026. Hello and welcome to USA Today's The Excerpt. I'm Dana Taylor. For more on the issues on the table and how these decisions might reshape life in America, I'm now joined by USA Today Justice Department correspondent Aysha Bagchi. Thanks for being here, Aysha.
Thanks, Dana. I'm happy to be here.
Let's start with the centerpiece of Trump's economic agenda, whether or not Trump-imposed tariffs are legal or were an overreach of power. The court heard arguments on both sides in November. What did they say?
This is a case that really deals with the centerpiece of President Trump's agenda this term, sweeping tariffs that he's imposed on countries around the world. The Supreme Court heard arguments in this, and they seemed to be a little skeptical of what the president has done here. They seem to be indicating, not just the liberal justices on the court, but some members of the conservative majority on the court seem to be a bit skeptical and to think that President Trump may have overstepped when it comes to these tariffs. President Trump is turning to a law from 1977 that gives the president the authority to regulate what's called importation in response to an extraordinary threat. Donald Trump has pointed to that law, saying that it applies in this kind of context, that he can impose these sweeping tariffs both to address trade deficits, to engage in foreign policy, and then people challenging the president's use of that law, including small businesses. They've argued that the law was never meant to give the president this type of sweeping authority. And they say that this is something that hurts costs for both businesses and consumers. And really, this is a power that should have rested with Congress. One practical thing that the Supreme Court is probably going to be considering as it issues a decision in the coming year is going to be that there's a lot of difficulty in rolling back what the president has already done. This would involve giving a refund of tens of billions of dollars in tariffs that have already been collected. So the Supreme Court is going to have to think carefully about how to deliver this ruling. And it also knows this is something that's a big priority to the president. Donald Trump even talked about attending the oral arguments at the Supreme Court for some time. He's really shown that this is an important issue to him. So it'll be a major ruling when it does come.
Another big one coming is the decision on birthright citizenship. This one challenges an executive order that the president issued on his first day in office. Tell me about that one.
As you mentioned, first day in office, huge priority. The president basically undid what has been the understanding about immigration law going back many, many decades. He issued an order that basically says that if you're born in the United States, but your parents are not authorized to be here or only have temporary authorization as opposed to permanent residency, then you are not automatically a U.S. citizen. This would be a major change in how we understand immigration rights in the U.S. Immigration rights groups and states in this country have challenged the president's order in this space. Donald Trump says this has to do with a provision of the Constitution that was really enacted after the Civil War to deal with people who were enslaved in the country. And it says that you're a citizen if you're born here and you're subject to U.S. jurisdiction. Donald Trump says that this was never meant for this type of context, outside of the context of the Civil War, when you're dealing with people who were simply born in this country in a kind of immigration-related situation. The states have said that the law is clear, that everyone born here is a citizen. And they also say that the president's new policy harms children. I talked to the California Attorney General just a few days after this order was issued by the president. And he said that many children in his state would be harmed by the executive order because Medicaid services and other educational and health services are harmed. There's federal funding that's attached to citizenship status. So it really would affect the types of services that children can get in this country. So a really huge, huge issue that the Supreme Court's going to be deciding, and really another pillar of President Trump's policy agenda tackling immigration.
Aysha, let's turn to the battle for redistricting. To date, 6 states have redrawn their congressional maps, with another 8 considering whether or not to redraw their maps. Of course, this map determines who voters can vote for to represent them in the House. The High Court recently ruled that Texas's GOP preferred map can go forward, but has not yet ruled on Louisiana's new map, which opponents say violates the 1965 Voting Rights Act. What did the two sides argue back in October?
Yes, this is a case that has had actually a lot of twists and turns. It goes back to a congressional map that was first created in Louisiana in 2022 in response to the 2020 census. And that congressional map included 6 congressional districts. Just one of those districts was majority Black, even though about a third of the state at this point is Black. And when that map was created, Black voters sued and said that this violates the Voting Rights Act. The Voting Rights Act has a provision that basically says it prohibits states from abridging the right to vote based on race. And the judge ruled that probably the map was a violation of that provision of the Voting Rights Act. After that, the state created a new map, and that map included 2 majority Black districts. But when the state created that map, some voters who described themselves as non-Black voters sued, and they said that the new map violates the Constitution. It's a form of unconstitutional racial gerrymandering, they said. So it's kind of a different sort of challenge that deals with debates that the Supreme Court is having about racial discrimination in the US. So the Supreme Court heard arguments basically pitting the Voting Rights Act against constitutional provisions that deal with equal treatment under the law. And interestingly, a very similar case was decided a couple years ago, where 2 members of the conservative majority on the court, Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Kavanaugh, joined with the liberals to uphold the Voting Rights Act against a similar challenge. But in the arguments that were heard this fall, both of those conservative members of the court seemed open to litigating, readdressing that type of decision. We're going to have to wait to see what the Supreme Court says in this case. But it's really about whether the congressional map can stand. And that's going to affect probably the Republican and Democratic makeup after the midterms in the 2026 elections.
2 other cases before the court that might impact the midterms next year involve deadlines for counting ballots and limits on campaign contributions. Tell me about those.
Yes, one of those cases has to do with whether states can accept mail in ballots that are mailed, sent in, cast by election day, but are actually received after election day. There are well over a dozen states that have laws that basically give a limited time period after election day for ballots to be received if they were cast by the election and still be counted. Going back to 2024, there were several hundreds of thousands of votes that came in this fashion, cast by election day, but received a bit after. And this case deals with a federal law that establishes the day for federal elections. Basically, what challengers are saying about these state policies is that they violate that law. So the Supreme Court is looking at the language and thinking about whether it means that the ballots have to be received by election day. It's another one of those cases that could really impact whether a lot of votes are counted or not. And it's one of those situations where you want clarity well before election day so that people who are campaigning can prepare and educate voters about what to expect. And then the second case you mentioned, it has to do with campaign finance limits on political parties, giving finances that are in coordination with a political candidate. These are limits that Republican groups have challenged. It's another situation where the Supreme Court has addressed this topic before. Many years ago, it issued a decision basically upholding these campaign finance limits against a constitutional challenge. That challenge basically says that these limits are a violation of the First Amendment because this campaign financing is, according to the challengers, a version of political speech. And the First Amendment protects freedom of speech. So they're saying that the Supreme Court should strike down these limits. We're going to have to see how the Supreme Court rules in this case. We know it has become more conservative from the time that it had previously addressed these limits. It's another issue that could have a big impact on the 2026 elections.
Aysha, as a presidential candidate, Trump ran on several anti-LGBTQ issues that animated the GOP base during the campaign. The Supreme Court will decide two of them next year. One is about conversion therapy, and the other is about the banning of transgender athletes. What's at stake with these two cases?
One of these cases, as you said, it deals with conversion therapy. It has to do with a particular Colorado law that prohibits licensed mental health care providers who are counseling patients who are under the age of 18 or providing treatment to patients who are under the age of 18 from trying to convince a patient out of having same sex attraction or convince a patient out of the gender identity issues that they are expressing. Colorado has this law, but there are actually many states across the country, again, who have laws like this one. And the person challenging this law is a counselor in Colorado who says that it's a violation of her free speech rights because, according to her, Colorado is discriminating against the type of talk therapy that she provides on the basis of the viewpoint that she's expressing. Here, Colorado has said that states have long had the power to regulate healthcare, that's different from infringing on free speech. And that healthcare provision comes with standards based on evidence. The state says, and many other states have said on their own, that conversion therapy has been shown to create harm, that it can increase anxiety, depression, thoughts of self harm. And so the law was really designed to prevent abusive practices. Now, the Colorado counselor who has been supported by the Trump administration in this lawsuit, she says that the evidence that conversion therapy is harmful looks at practices that go beyond the type of talk therapy that she provides. Things like conducting electric shock therapy to try to create negative associations with same-sex attraction or things like that. And her lawyer, when he was arguing before the Supreme Court in the fall, he also argued in particular when it comes to issues around gender identity for children who haven't reached puberty yet. He made the case that the evidence is on his side and on his client's side when it comes to the best treatment here. That's an issue that's hotly disputed by medical bodies, both in the US and in Europe. But it's a case where the Supreme Court is really going to be deciding whether there's a free speech issue that restricts states from getting involved in this space. And it may be the case that the Supreme Court is thinking about these public policy considerations in the background when it comes to such hotly debated and divisive topics. But it's definitely an issue that's going to create concern for people, probably no matter how the Supreme Court rules. The second case you mentioned has to do with transgender rights in athletics. There are many states at this point that have banned transgender women and girls from participating in women's and girls' athletics and sports. And there have been challenges brought by transgender athletes who say, basically, they make two arguments. They say that these laws, these bans are a violation of the Constitution. The Constitution includes provisions that are designed to guarantee that people are treated equally under the law, that they have the same privileges under the law as everyone else. And then they also say that this violates Title IX, which was a law that was basically passed to enable women and girls to have support in athletics, to protect women and girls' athletics. And they say that this is discrimination based on sex under that law, and it should be struck down for that reason. The states that have these bans say that the bans are designed to protect fairness and competition and safety within sports. As you mentioned, this is just a hugely divisive, politically charged topic in the United States, and it's going to be another case where the Supreme Court is going to be weighing in on what is a major, at least, social policy for the Trump administration.
Aysha Bagchi is a USA Today Justice Department correspondent. Thank you so much for being on the Excerpt, Aysha.
Thanks for having me, Dana.
Thanks for watching. I'm Dana Taylor. I'll see you next time.